Hi, I'm Deborah Henson-Conant, and this is Kathleen Wiley. This is In Between the Music, and Kathleen is a Jungian analyst, is that right?
That's right.
And a harp player.
That's right.
And we have no idea what we're going to talk about today, but we have been talking about having a conversation for about 4 years, right? Ever
Yes.
since I was in your car, and we started the conversation.
Yes.
And I don't even have any specific questions for you, but I noticed, we both have harps in the background, which is great. But why don't you tell me some of the basics of what Jung and Jungian analysis is all about?
Okay. Yeah, I can do that. Jungian analysis is one of those modalities that is spiritual and holistic, but also very much rooted in the neuroscience and neurobiology and developmental psychology of how personality is formed and how relationships happen. Freud was the first psychoanalyst who discovered the unconscious, and then there's this whole second generation of analysts who furthered his theory, agreed with some of what he said, and disagreed with some of what he said. Jung was one of those second generation analysts. And one of the main things that he disagreed with Freud on, which I think is so important with music and what you talk about, DHC, particularly in the Strings of Passion, that he really very much believed that libido is the psychic energy which can manifest in many different ways, whereas Freud believed that libido is all sexual in nature, and any other manifestation is sublimated. Jung didn't believe that. He believed that psychic energy took many forms, one of which he said was the instinct for creativity.
Oh, okay. I have like 5 questions already. Okay, so you said the word modality. And I've heard that in many different places, but as you said it, and we're both musicians, and you're also speaking, about psychology, what does modality, we know what modality means in music, has to do with one set of things, one set of strings, and looking at them in a different context. So different modes in music are just simply starting on a different string, in a sense, and having that string as your context for looking at the universe. Now, how does that relate to modality in the way that you used it? Or does it at all?
Well, it does, in that if you go see any mental health professional or any spiritual counselor, anyone who's working in what I call the psycho-spiritual realm, then they're starting from a point of reference, like the string that may be the root of the chord or the tonic that you always go back home to. So they're starting from a particular point that's the reference point, or the angle from which they view things and how they feel things move out and expand into the person, into the personality, into behavior, etc.
Wow, that is amazing. So each different modality starts with a different reference point and expands into the person. So we would see a different personality or a different personness to a certain extent, depending on what modality we start with.
Well, you would see a different, you might not see a different person, but you would see a different understanding of why that person is the way they are. So for instance, Western medicine and psychiatry very much operates under a medical model, which is looking at things as pathological and disease. Jungian analysis does not do that at all. Jung very much believed that everything we do is our psyche's best attempt at helping us adapt and be successful in the world. So he says neurosis is the best attempt at a cure. And so that it's a very different way of responding to what's going on within you and in how you live in the world than pathologizing it and making it disease.
As you said that, the first thought that came to me, and I don't know why, is that when you said Jung, neurosis is our best way of trying to heal or whatever it was, I thought, oh, so I see. Our neuroses are us blooming in different ways, almost like we're a garden and different parts of us are blooming or something. Is that anything like
Well, it is that we're blooming in different ways, but typically what happens is that the neurosis comes into manifestation early in life because we're very limited in our sense of power because we're helpless and dependent on the adults around us. So the neurotic behavior develops because that's really one of the only options we've got. And it's a primitive choice, meaning it's unconscious. It just happens.
What, is it always a dependent behavior?
Well, it's always dependent in that it is a response to the environment including relational and resonance.
Ah.
So,
So it's not pure in the sense that it's always in response to something else.
that's right. It's in response to the interaction between the child and the psychosocial environment would be how Erik Erikson would talk about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so what tends to happen, though, is those neurotic behaviors, although at one point in time they were very helpful to us, usually what happens in adulthood is they begin to really create problems. And they begin to block our energy and be harmful to us. They prevent us from moving toward what we want. So like the impulses that are the first starting point for the creative process, if you've got a neurosis that's blocking energy, the impulse gets blocked and it doesn't ever get to flow out.
So I think you answered the next question that I was going to have, which is how would you identify a neurosis? Mm-hmm. And it sounds like is it always something that blocks the flow of energy?
Yes. Yes. And this is one of the points, again, from Jung's point of view. He said every psyche or soul has a gradient that the libido or psychic energy will naturally follow. And where that natural gradient gets blocked or interfered with is where we become neurotic.
Wow. So I was going to say, okay, so take me as an example. Look at and now as I ask that, I'm like, right, that's what Kathleen does for a living. She does that for people. But is that what that is? Is that what Jungian analysis is when you work with people? Is identifying that?
It's very much, it's a piece of what goes on. I mean, Jungian analysis is very much about helping one connect with their pure essence or the totality of their psyche soul. And to do that, the first thing we have to do is withdraw the energy from all these personas we've adopted, all the adaptive self. Then we have to begin to go within and deal with all of these learned patterns and neurotic behaviors and adaptations that aren't helpful. Then we can begin to connect with our pure essence, which is also where you find the creative muse.
Right. Well, yes. And it was really interesting because you said the whole thing is interesting, but you started talking about libido.
Mm-hmm.
And, how Freud thinks of it as sexual and Jung considers it part of all creativity, right? Did I understand that correct? And then, and so that takes us to creativity and also puts us in the realm of, well, I guess it's just, I'm thinking, oh yeah, Freud, sex equals the procreation or the point of procreation.
Uh-huh.
Jung, creativity equals the point of all creation. Like, what am I seeing? Am I seeing that? What am I seeing?
Well, I don't know that I would put it together that way because Jung actually says that there are 5 kind of instinctive manifestations of libido: hunger, sexuality, movement, self-reflection, and creativity.
Tell me about movement.
Well, the first movement is what a baby does when they discover they have toes and they put their leg up in the air and they wiggle their toes with their hands.
So they find themselves in space. Do you mean finding ourselves in space?
Finding ourselves in space. But as adults, it's our sense of movement every day. When we move, that gives us our sense of our body, our sense of where we're contained in our skin. Your running is an example of an expression of that.
Uh-huh. And dancing is such
a
very powerful one.
Yes.
So let's talk about that for a minute. I mean, we don't have an agenda or anything. One of the things that I noticed, my partner and I split up a few years ago and I started dancing again. And I love couples dancing. Mm-hmm. And I've talked about leadership and fellowship, mm-hmm. and the power of fellowship. And one of the things I noticed in dancing is how much I love following
Mm-hmm.
and what it feels like and what it awakens in me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why did I ask you about this? I guess I just want to, it's something so unusual. It's something that I don't experience anywhere else. The only place I get close to it is if I'm harmonizing with somebody and singing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the experience of being able to either amplify or resonate to somebody else's intention,
Mm-hmm.
physical intention. But it's so powerful. It's such a powerful area, and it feels like I don't even know how to touch it or identify it. I mean, it feels like it's in a primal area of my experience.
Yeah, and what I would say is I think it's touching that primal place of where, you know, the infant child leans against mother and the mother's body gives to meet the infant child's body that gives. So there is a sense of connection and union, because again, sexuality isn't just about literal sex, but it's about the urge for union. And in the leadership followership that happens in dancing, particularly ballroom dancing, there's a union. It's like the two become one in the movement.
Yeah, I find that utterly fascinating. I mean, I think that's another reason I love improvisation, is that that area where you're you, but you stop being the you that is just, I've decided to do something.
Right.
And you're being you. It's not in reaction to somebody else. It's oddly with them.
Yes, yes, yes. It's a real partnership that, you know, again, our first partner is our mother, the infant in utero with the mother. It's the first, and it's a very primal, as you said it's very primal, it's very body. It's not a head thing.
Right.
And we can't make it happen. We can't call it up, but we can give ourselves to it.
Right. It comes, wow. So it comes from being with another person, human being.
That's right.
Does it have to be with a human? It has to be with a human being,
Yes.
because do other animals have that impulse to sing or to dance? Do any other animals dance like that?
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, sometimes my little dog will play with my neighbor's dog and they do kind of that back and forth.
Right.
And John has taught a family that got a little dog, and they would sometimes, they did old time music and bluegrass, and there was a certain note frequency they could get to, and their little dog would start to howl, like singing with them.
Right.
You know, so
I think of that thing in birds oh wow. So when birds are flying and then they just shift and they all shift together.
Yeah.
I think that's a close, and I'll bet there's other animals that do that too. Okay, all right. And I wonder if that's a similar experience that they have, but who knows? I don't know.
Well, they're definitely responding to the energy field, which, you know, we are first and foremost unconscious beings, not conscious. You know, our ego likes to think that we're in charge and we lead, but the truth is that there's so much more to us than we can ever in any one moment consciously know. And this is where you give yourself over to it so beautifully, Deborah, with improvisation. Because you don't know what's going to come, but you go with what comes. It's like, you know, there's something more there, but you couldn't necessarily say this is what's going to happen next.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you might have a structure of a chord progression, but you're going with that.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. The beauty of it is that you don't know what's going to happen, and that whatever happens is okay.
Yeah.
That's the freedom of the stage, and that's the freedom of improvisation. And as you were saying that, and I was thinking of birds, I was thinking like, right, that's like flying. That's where it feels like flying. To let go and just let that happen, that balance happen, or I don't even know if it's balance. Okay, so we talked about modality, which is this is all out of your first 3 sentences. Modality. So there's many different modalities, right? So that like Freud has a modality, Jung has a modality. There's infinite modalities, and probably every Jungian analyst has their own modality to a certain extent, right?
They would have their own interpretation.
So let me ask you this. So have you ever played classical music?
No.
Okay. But you've heard it.
Yes.
Okay. And when people play classical music, they are regenerating something that, you know, is dead on the page. I mean, I don't know if it's dead on the page, but they're regenerating something in their own way. So, and then there's jazz charts where people are actually just taking a blueprint and inventing off of it. So those are two different things. When you're a Jungian analyst, how does your work relate to as Jung would have been an analyst?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. And I'm going to tell you, when Jung resisted there ever being a Jungian training institute, because the primary tenet of Jungian analysis in his theory was what he called individuation, which really means living the soul you are, not imitating someone else, not being like someone else. So he resisted the formation of a training institute, but finally, I think it was in 1951, he agreed to that, and the first training institute came into being in Zurich. What I would say is I think for my work as an analyst is based on the understanding of the psyche that Jung gave us, on the understanding of psychic dynamics, like projection, introjection, those kinds of things. And that so that my understanding of psychic structures comes from him, my understanding of how psychic energy works and what that means in terms of health and neurosis comes from him. My understanding of working with the unconscious through dreams, through outer role synchronicities, through body symptoms, and then the understanding that there is a realm of the collective unconscious out of which the archetypal energies as well as instinctive energies arise. So I would say that my work is like Jung's in that body of a body of understanding that informs then how I sit with someone and how I respond and how I make sense of what's happening for them.
Wow. Okay. So it's almost like you've taken his toolbox or something almost. And you're creating your own thing out of that toolbox. Yeah.
It's like having a basic paradigm that you work within. You know, you talk about the structure. Right. So, you know, it's like all psychoanalysts, Freudian, Jungian, Reichian, Adlerian, have a commonality of structure and that they're working with the unconscious as primary. Okay.
So that means the unconscious is the primary and the conscious is doing whatever it's doing. But
that's right.
Oh, wow.
That the unconscious is really what's in charge.
Wow.
We like to think we can direct with our ego. But, you know, how many times have we tried only to know we can't? Right. You know, but, you know, my favorite quote by Jung is he says, by building a conscious relationship to the unconscious, we can mitigate the negative effects of the unconscious. Oh. By building a conscious relationship to the unconscious, we can mitigate the negative effects of the unconscious. We don't make it go away.
Right.
We don't control it. We don't even channel it. We don't direct it. But by being in relationship to it, there's an organic process that mitigates the negative effects of it.
So it has negative effects of, oh, I see. Wow. So I'm getting all kinds of images. I'm getting images of, you know, streams or things that are not, are bypassing each other, but when they connect, things can flow in both directions, and that creates a sense of health and an interconnection. I'm also, and I'm thinking about Frankenstein, but I think about Frankenstein a lot. It's one of my favorite books, and I'm thinking about that moment when the monster comes to Victor Frankenstein and says, please make me, if you will just make me a mate. Uh-huh. I will go away. I won't bother anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Frankenstein refuses.
Mm-hmm.
It's just heartbreaking to me, heartbreaking. And but when you were talking about that, by making the connection, by those two making the connection, the all the negativity, or what, you know, all the harm of the one goes away.
Yes. Yes. It's mitigated. And that's the transformative process.
Huh.
Yeah. But it's about being in relationship.
Huh.
Yeah.
Being in wow. So how is this different? And how is it the same as, for example, in religion, someone's relationship to God?
Right. Well, you know, Jung postulated that within human beings there is a religious instinct. And he said that religious instinct is there in an attempt to connect to the larger self.
Right.
Yeah. So that.
Oh, I see the collective unconscious. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have our sense of self that's defined by our body and our consciousness of who we are, our ego. But there's this instinctive knowing that there's something greater than that. So that the religious impulse for God is the search for the something greater. And Jung actually said, in terms of psychic structures, that he used the Eastern term of the Atman and the self with a capital S to describe the totality of psyche. And he said that the totality of psyche, the self with a capital S, is a part of God that God put in us to know that there is a God, you know. Yeah. So, yeah. So it's like the self.
Oh, it's like that. It reminds me of those in those old stories where somebody gives somebody else the half of a locket.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's also reminding me of something else I'm always really interested in, which is colonial animals, like animals like ants or something, who there is an individual, but the termitary or the ant hill or something is really the individual, you know, and the queen is the, and just wondering, you know, how do they feel? Like, how do they feel as individuals? How do they feel as part of the whole? I don't know, but that's a whole other thing. I mean, I don't know if it's a whole other thing or if it's a similar thing. I don't know if, I mean, yeah, okay. Well, I'm just going to say this, although I think it's totally irrelevant, but maybe it's relevant because, so ants are individuals, but not really, because they can't really survive alone.
Right.
And when they meet, they do some kind of thing. I don't know what they do. Like, I mean, I'm always assuming when ants meet and they like touch each other, and then it's like, how's it going with you? Oh, it's going great. Okay. Like, what's it like to be an ant? Well, this is what it's like to be an ant. Okay, good. Okay, got it. I'm an ant. Great. And so there's that relationship. And then there's the relationship to the whole. And then they act in ways they probably don't even know about based on being part of a whole. I'm probably going off on a tangent here, right?
Well, no, I don't, not necessarily. I don't know a lot about how the ant society works. Okay. But what I'll say...
And neither do I, by the way.
Yeah. I think when we get into the insect realm, we're talking about a level of, in the ant world, as you're describing it, a lack of differentiation. That is what we all start with as an infant. There isn't a separate self of the infant from the mother. That the self, the sense of separateness has to develop.
That is really interesting. I mean, like stem cells.
Yeah.
Like stem cells haven't differentiated. They could be anything.
Right.
And the unusual, tell me if I'm right here. And so what's always been interesting to me about anything that differentiates, because colonial animals do that. I mean, animals that live in colonies, some of them will actually differentiate and they'll become the mouth. And anyway, that doesn't matter. But what's always been interesting to me is that once you differentiate, can you shift back?
Yeah. Well, from my observation after working for 30 years, if you're on the path of individuation, once you start on it, you don't turn back without dire consequences to your own sense of self and ability to cope with reality. That it's kind of like an expansion that you cannot, if you try to deny that or disavow that, it's it's really harmful. I mean, it does.
Oh, okay. So interesting. Okay. So you're talking about the expansion, once the expansion process happens.
Yeah.
Is neurosis not a sort of differentiation also? Is it not a sort of like, oh, I don't know. I mean, we may be talking about two different things.
Yeah, I would not think of neurosis as an individuation. Neurosis is like a displacement of energy. Because one of Jung's definitions of neurosis is its avoidance of legitimate suffering. So, for instance, people who binge eat, very often, I mean, I won't say it's an absolute, but very often, the deeper unconscious feeling behind binge eating is a lack of containment, a lack of being nurtured and held, mothered.
Oh, wow.
And so that the neurosis, the neurotic behavior, is actually a displacement. So you suffer with the behavior. People are eating, gaining weight they don't want to, but it avoids having to deal with those very primitive body feelings of not being held, of flying apart, of being starved to death emotionally.
Huh.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we've come and opened a Pandora's box here.
Okay. We probably have.
I love it. I mean, who doesn't want to open Pandora's box? I mean, there's so much interesting stuff in there. I just feel like I'm taking you on a journey. So, but let's just go back. Let's go back on that journey. We talked about differentiation, meaning going from stem cells, or going from who we are, or going from being our mothers, no different than our mothers, to actually becoming ourselves, and right, and what happens along that journey,
right,
or where we stumble. Is it where we, and just stop me if I'm saying it, if I'm going off on the wrong way of saying it, and then where the energy gets stopped. So when we expand into who we are, if something gets stopped along the way, that's where it kind of like, it's like like a dam or a little eddy or something like this, where
the energy gets stopped.
Okay.
Yeah. And I want to relate the differentiation to one of the things that you talk about, and in your programs, I can't remember if it was in Strings of Passion, but you talk about finding your voice as a harpist. It's like your individual voice.
Right.
Like
right.
There's the collective kind of archetypal sense of what a harpist does and how a harpist sounds. But that the whole work of being an artist is having your voice. It's like differentiating out from that collective.
Right.
So that's an example of differentiation that applies to the music journey.
Right. And what happens with, for example, an instrument like the harp is that it people's perceptions, ours included, tend to coagulate, or something, that may have been the wrong word, around one particular interpretation of what a harp is, or what a harpist is. And I remember that when I sort of needed to reinvent the harp, I had to say, stop thinking harp. What is it really? Is it, and then it was like, well, it's a triangle of wood with strings. And I was like, no, it's a resonating body, which the thing, I mean, I just kept abstracting and abstracting and abstracting to find out, what is it really? Right. And I think that when we go to find our voice, we need to do that same kind of abstracting, because we have gotten so caught into what we think we need to do, or what we think we need to sound like.
Right. And so the same thing is true on a larger scale for who we are as a person. We learn these things from our family, from school, from church, from our peers, about who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to move in the world. But they may not be how we're supposed to move in the world, or who we really are when we get to our essence. Just like the harp you wanted wasn't the pedal harp that had been imagined for decades.
Right. It was something that wasn't there yet.
Right.
But it was.
That's right.
And so I think what you're saying is that who we actually are is already there. but we haven't we've been inhibited in actually expanding into that. Is that right?
That's right. And these adaptive patterns, some of which are neurotic, block that energy. So as we can unblock that energy and let the flow happen, follow the impulse that comes from within, then we can see who we really are. We can begin to take action on those soul impulses instead of the learned adaptive ones.
That's so interesting. And it's so interesting that you said the word impulse, because impulse is the beginning of in strings of passion. It's what I identify as the beginning of the journey from impulse to expression, which can happen instantaneously, or it can take years depending on what you're expressing. And you said there's action. And you also said there's action to kind of discovering ourselves. And I'm thinking, is that what you said? Yeah. And I'm thinking that, so there's discovery of ourselves. And when we play an instrument and share, we are discovering ourselves for other people, or letting them discover us.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like you're discovering yourself in relationship to other people. How you play for one person is probably different than how you play for 250 people. Although there may be similarities, but there are nuances of difference, which is also what we begin to find. We learn and express different nuances of ourselves in relationship to different parts of ourselves and in relationship to different people in our life.
Oh, because different people are going to bring out different, or sort of, differently, right? Okay.
Yeah, just like different audiences, different environments, like your bicycle tour harping in Boston. You know, that brought out something in the clip you did, you know, with, I can't remember if he was a taxi driver that's singing, but you know.
Oh, right, that guy, right.
Yeah. I mean, that brought out something that only happened in that context, in that moment with those people.
Right. So being a musician actually allows you to, being a musician allows you to make the sound or the symphony or whatever it is of a specific moment.
Right. Yes. Which is what we want to be able to do in our life. The whole current pop movement for mindfulness, being in the moment, you know, the present moment. That's what it's about. It's about that symphony that can only happen in that moment in time and space.
I see. Oh, I get it. And that's called actually being alive.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Well, that's great. So Kathleen, you're also a musician and you're learning an instrument. And I know we can't get, I feel like we could have 1,000 conversations about this, but what are you learning, and that's sort of making you think of what you do for a living? I mean, what's happening? How are you being different as a musician because of this?
Wow.
Either of those questions. I just kind of want to see what are you a different kind of musician because you're a Jungian analyst, or are you putting that aside, or can you even put that aside?
Yeah, you know, I don't know that I can put it aside because it's just so much a part of who I am. It's so my life's work is professionally is so tied to my nature, my soul's desires. But what I will say is my goal for myself this year with the Harp, because I started taking lessons 7 years ago, and you know, and there's always that I want to be further along than I am, but I'm really working to what you say about that the liftoff. We have to really live into and celebrate what we can do now.
Yeah.
So part of my goal for the Harp this year is I want to bring the same poise and trust to what I do on the Harp that I do every day when I sit with analysis or when I present in front of 250 people, I want to trust that what I've done and who I am is enough. Because I've suffered in living with a professional folk musician, I've learning an instrument.
That's tough.
Yeah, I've suffered from, it's not right enough, it's not good enough, and then early on learning the technique and the emphasis on the right notes. And so
right.
My goal for this year is to really bring all that I have am and have developed vis-a-vis my profession to bear when I sit at the harp. So that now part of what I'm doing when I sit down at the harp is just really taking a minute to just really check in with myself and really be present. And I'm finding the difference that makes than if I just sit down to start to play the song I'm trying to learn, or to join in. So that
what I hear you saying is that you are taking a moment to bring yourself.
Yes, and to bring my whole self, not just the student of the harp who feels so new still.
Wow, that's really beautiful. So you're bringing your whole self, including the expert.
Yes,
which does take a huge amount of trust.
Yeah.
To bring it to something that you are in the beginner position.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's really interesting. It's interesting to me because, as you probably know, there's a lot of technical things I struggle with.
Yeah.
And I talk about that to students.
Mm-hmm.
And technical things like dealing with YouTube or,
Mm-hmm.
social media or stuff like that. And because of that, or maybe because of that, I don't bring my expert self. I don't bring that self who knows. What an interesting, even thinking about that, I'm just having this feeling in my stomach, like this kind of balancing feeling.
Uh-huh.
You're in a situation, you don't know.
Right.
You don't have all the expertise. And yet you are bringing the expert you to it.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Wow. That's very powerful. I wonder what would happen, if each student in the academy was able to take that moment and bring that.
Yeah, it's like tapping into that place of our expertise where we do feel confident, and starting with what we don't know from that place, which to me is one of the beauty, and this I guess is where it connects really to Jungian psychology, is Erich Neumann, who was a third generation Jungian analyst, he coined the term ego-self axis to talk about the flow of energy between our conscious ego, little s self, and our larger self, capital S self, the totality of psyche. That we want this ego-self axis where there's a conscious flow of information so that we can always be tapping in, and we can call on that, or we can tune into that when we need it. But the tendency for me early on with the harp, of course, was to lead with the ego. Oh, I have to do this. I have to learn this. I have to.
Right.
Versus, okay, yes, I am learning this. And there's a larger self here who probably already knows how to play the harp somewhere back in previous lives,
Right. Well, you're making me think about two things. And I can't, one of them, I think they're both the same, maybe. My song, The Nightingale.
Mm-hmm.
The simplest song I play. Well, there's one that's even more simple, but it's really simple. And it was very difficult for me to feel comfortable playing it because it was so simple and I felt it didn't show me, blah, blah, blah. And yet it is the song that people love the most. That's the song people want to hear. And when I finally accepted that, finally was able to accept that for reasons beyond what I don't know, they want to hear this beautiful, simple song. I had this moment when was in my head, and I was saying, are you kidding? Are you telling me that I had all the skills I needed at 12 to give an audience myself? And I spent all this time developing all this flashy stuff, and really it was just for me. And yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I still want to do it because it's really fun.
Right.
And it's so hard to accept. And I think, and yet, when I watch my students in the academy, I notice people often stuttering, meaning stuttering at the instrument.
Yeah.
And, because I think we are always trying to do especially as adults, we can hear beyond what we can do. And so we're trying to do that thing because that's what we think is being good. And what we're missing is actually how to find the thing we can do right now at a level of artistry that is as good as anything. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I believe that's true. And it may just be a single note or anyway. So why am I saying this? Why do you think I'm saying this?
Well, I think part of what you're feeling is that the nightingale, which you wrote about your mother, that it captures that emotion that's so primal in your body that you can't put it into words, but you could express it on the harp. And that essence is in that tune. And so when people hear it, they tap into that feeling because it's a primal essence. This is how we're all one as human beings. It's not that we're literally one, but we all share the same primitive experiences.
Mm-hmm. And you said the word capture.
Yeah.
And I think that may be the key to us actually connecting with our actual abilities. When we try to craft something, we're often trying to get beyond where we've got this perception and we're trying to achieve it.
Right.
And if we could capture that moment that we're there, even if it's just like, whatever that moment is, and actually experience it, like
yes.
it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Then things flow out of that. And I think, of course, the minute that happens, we feel like, well, that's not enough. And that is exactly how I felt about the nightingale. It's not enough.
Right. But it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And I know that I would be fascinated watching somebody truly actually hear themselves play something.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's bring this back. See if we can bring this back. So I just said someone hearing themselves. And does that, and then, and just some of the concepts we've gone through, we were talking, one of it was, there was somewhere in the beginning that you said something and then you expand into yourself. Was that anything like, and then we also talked about discovering yourself. So
Jung says that every psyche needs its own manual, that we can have a generic manual, which for him would be like the psychic structures, just like we all have a skeleton. Right. And our skeletons are all, quote, the same, but they're different, but we're all different. We're fleshed out different. Every psyche is fleshed out differently. Right. So every psyche needs its own manual. So part of analysis is really seeing what your manual is, hearing what your manual is in your actions, in your experiences. With the harp, that one note that's the essence of you, is like really allowing something to come up and out of you to hear it. So that there is that need that we all have to really see who we really are. Not who we think we are, not who we want to be, not who other people think we are, but who we are in the most simplistic of ways. Because once we know those things about us, then we can begin, if we want to change something, if we want to shape that in a different way. But if we don't hear or see who we really are, just like if you don't hear or see your voice in the harp, it's never going to be your expression of the song.
Right. So when we're playing the instrument, we're also listening to the instrument.
Yes.
And unless we're not.
Unless we're not. Just like we go through our day with ourselves, unless we're not. You know, Angela Sarian used to have an expression. She was a cultural anthropologist who was also a spiritual teacher. She wrote The Fourfold Way. She passed a few years ago, but Angela used to say that we don't want to walk the procession of the living dead. But there are a lot of people walking the procession of the living dead.
Sure. I mean, because that roadway is pretty easy to see.
Yeah, yeah. So what you were saying earlier is about being alive and expressing the aliveness.
So when you sit down at your harp, when we sit at our instruments, whatever technical level we're at, if we can actually listen and love.
Yes.
Is it important to listen and love?
Yes.
What we're doing,
yes.
We are creating a connection. I mean, I think that's kind of what I was discovering in Strings of Passion, that we can we can heal the disconnect inside by how we approach our instrument, or we can make that disconnect even greater by how we approach the instrument.
Yes, yes. And we could say the same thing is true of everything we do in life.
Exactly, right.
But with the music, and because music is so healing, the vibrational resonances are so healing, that if we approach our music and our instrument, and particularly the harp, with that intention of connection, that's what's most important.
Oh, so first, I mean, there's 5 questions I have in my head about why is it healing, blah, blah, blah. So, but the connection is, and I think I hear myself saying this, connect to yourself, to your instrument, to the music, to the audience, that all of those connections, oh my gosh. So all those things happen, the individual connection, the connection to another, and the connection to the environment, all of that happens with an instrument.
Yes. Yes.
And then we actually hear and feel the resonance of what we're doing if we listen to it.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've found for myself, because I've ventured to some of the Irish sessions at one of the pubs, because of course John, is an Irish fiddler, as well as old time. I've learned a few old time tunes for the harp, but I hate playing in those noisy environments where it's like a competition.
Right.
But we have a group of musician friends who come over and have a friend who's a banjo maker who just loves the harp. When we first met, he said, "Oh, I've been wanting to play with the harpist." So now we have harp-centered jams at our house.
That's great.
And there's such a different feeling to be with people who honor the harp and want harp tunes, not the harp trying to play all kinds of other tunes, which is great.
Yeah.
But I really love the harp tunes. I love the waltzes, the airs.
Right.
And the reels are great too. But I don't want to play at dance speed. That's just not what I want to do. I don't want to get those things up to that speed.
Right. Even if you were just playing chords.
I have just not gotten into that very much. I've tried, and so that's on my to-do list for the year. Is to try to let myself. I think some of it has to do with the lack of trust that I'm not gonna get it right. So that's on one of my goals. That's on one of in the wheel where we identified goals. That's one of them.
Yeah, that's great.
But the point I was trying to make is that what you said about the environmental resonance is key to my experience of playing the harp. So it's just not my relation. It is my relationship to myself and to my instrument, but that whole experience is also shaped by the other people, by the sound level, all of those things, And so the other thing I decided in the last few months is that I'm going to play the harp in the way I want to play the harp. Yeah. That I don't ever have to go to another Irish pub jam if I don't want to with my harp, you know.
Yes, you don't. Yes, and I can give you a permission slip to not do that too.
Thank you. You know, but you know, John and I are going to co-lead a pilgrimage to Iona in April with another colleague of mine, a Jungian analyst who's been leading pilgrimages for years. And John's going to go and do music, and I'm going to take my 27-string harp to do music. And I'm already feeling into the meditative, kind of whispery, you know, threshold between worlds kinds of songs.
That's great.
Yeah. So what we're talking about relationship all the way around, you know, it all informs us. And part of what, from Jungian analysis, we want to be as conscious as we can of how those variables affect us. As a musician, if we know those things, then it really does empower us to move towards what we want, you know.
Wait a minute, say that again. I'm sorry. I had in my head, you were talking about the harp, and I started thinking, wow, the harp, unlike other tools like the hammer, can be so many different things. Or I mean, any instrument can. It can be both accompany the fiddle tunes, play the fiddle tunes, and then also do the kind of music you were just describing.
Yes.
I was just thinking, like, wow, that's really interesting. Other tools don't. I mean, maybe they do, but I don't know that they have that much flexibility as instruments do. So anyway, back, what did you last say? I was on the harp analogy.
I don't know. I'm back. I'm with you now with thinking about that. The harp has this great breadth of what it can convey.
Yep. And that when I first started playing the harp, and for all the years that I was just being like, why did I play the harp? What was I thinking? You know, it's just not what I want. And then beginning to realize that it is because it has this breadth, and it has this nakedness, and it's open, and it's resonant, and it's, you know, transparent, and it's physical, and, you know, all those things that I love that I didn't realize were part of it.
Yes.
And but that's not what you were just talking about. But so you said you're going to Iona, is that
Iona, Scotland?
Okay, all right. And does that have something to do with Jung?
No, not necessarily. Iona is one of the islands off the coast of Scotland, and there is it's for a long time been considered a very sacred place where the veils between worlds are thin.
Oh.
There is an abbey that was started by Saint Columba. I don't know if you know that little tune, Saint Columba. He started. Oh. So my colleague and I are going to co-lead a pilgrimage, the theme of which is the magic of every day. So,
wow. And you're going to have your harp with you.
Yeah. And talking about resonances, one of my favorite tunes I love, If I Were a Blackbird. It's a ballad. I don't know if you know that. It's one of those sad Scottish ballads, or Irish, you know, where the lad takes the lassie to the fair and then promises her love, then he goes out to sea. And the words of the song are, if I were a blackbird, I'd fly away with you. You know, I'd follow you out to sea, I'd nest in your pocket. Oh. But when I heard the tune, I didn't know the words. I just was listening to it on a CD where it was an instrumental, and I fell in love with it. Uh-huh. It just touched something with me. So my words for it, if I were a blackbird, I'd fly away with you, and I would work magic in all that we do. And I love that tune, and it's one of the tunes that just I naturally play expressively because it touched something in me. And
that's another thing. You're making me realize another thing for everybody, that there's also specific tunes that are going to move you.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So all of that ties into really finding one's own voice and the relationship. I think that's what I was saying before we talked about the breath, is that there are all of these relationships that come to bear in the moment. And the more conscious that we are of what we're experiencing in our body, mind, soul, then the more information we have that can inform us to better navigate, so that we can have more experiences where more of our soul gets to live in the world.
And as you're saying that, and you said, as we are in those moments, as we become more conscious, I was thinking that as we play music, if we really focus in on what we're doing, we let go of what I should be doing, we allow ourselves to play something over and over again and really get deep into it. I think we do become conscious in an unconscious way. You would know better than I those things, but that it almost feels like that's a place where we could have the conscious and the unconscious meet.
Absolutely.
And we could choose to do that in that moment.
We can definitely choose to set up the conditions for that to happen.
Right.
I often say about when people ask me, how can I make that change in myself? I say, we can't make organic change happen. It's like gardening. We can plant flowers, but we can't make it grow. But we can water, we can fertilize, we can plant the right seeds, we can pull the weeds. And the same is true for our psyche. And I think the same is true for music.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that one of the big takeaways from this conversation for musicians, takeaways in terms of what they can do.
Yes.
Actually, sit at their instrument and play and listen without judgment.
Yes.
Listen for the listening of the listening and continue to do it. Do not stop. Do not correct. Keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, and allow the conscious and the unconscious to actually meet.
Yes.
In that practice, in that moment.
Yes, because that's one of the things that I really appreciated in your Strings of Passion, where you talked about the difference between having a practice and different practices.
Right.
And that when we have a practice, it's something we just do. And we just do it without an expectation of an outcome, but we show up and we do it.
Right.
It's kind of like some of the, like active imagination, which Jung talked about, where we dialogue with parts of ourselves. I always tell people, when it happens, it may seem like this is the most mundane, useless thing you've ever done. Or you may get some brilliant insight. But either way, the act of doing it is what makes the difference. And so the showing up to the heart and listening without judgment, with compassionate presence.
That's right. Compassionate presence and the doing of it. You said doing.
The doing.
You are doing of it. You're doing it and you're listening and you're being all in the same moment.
Yes. Yeah. And that then that's the gardening that can allow something to grow.
Right. And you don't know what's going to grow.
That's right.
I see. And so that would be one of the steps in actually connecting to your voice, allowing that voice out, making a space for that voice to bloom.
Yes. For it to show up.
Right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, this seems like a perfect place.
Okay.
That's beautiful. And I would love to talk about this stuff more.
Okay.
Anytime you want. I mean, it's just fascinating. I just feel like we've scratched the surface of I don't even know where if it's Jung at Harp, where Jung meets music. So Kathleen, thank you so much. I just love this.
You're welcome, DH. This is great. It's been fun. A lot of fun. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, okay.
I'm going to officially end this now.
Okay.
But,